Hello and a very warm welcome to Talking Europe. He lost by 0.3%. The anti-EU, anti-immigration nationalist candidate Norbert Hofer is not Austria's new president, but he did come incredibly close. Support for the Freedom Party there is clearly high, and Austria is not alone. In Finland, Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, France, basically across the EU, right-wing political groups calling for their national interest to be put first are gaining ground. So is the idea of a European Union dead, or are votes for these parties more or less a protest against traditional centrist groups? Well, with us in studio to talk about that, we have from Germany, Ms. Ingeborg GRASSLE. You're from the ruling CDU party. On the other side of the table, we have from Spain, Mr. Ernest Urtasun, member of the country's Green Party. And across from you, from Finland and the Finns party, a nationalist party there that is in government, we have Mr. JUSSI HALLA-AHO. Thanks for your time. And again, finally, but last but not least, we have from Austria, Ms. Evelyn Regner. You're from the Socialist and Democrat Party. Let me start, perhaps, Mr. Regner, with your good self. That presidential vote, it came so close. You clearly a lot of support there for that very nationalist anti-EU party.
Of course, first of all, we're all relieved, absolutely relieved. Democratic Austria is relieved that the result is finally the one that Mr. van der Bellen won. But almost 50%, almost 50%, that's really far more than simply a mistake. That's really a big, big thing.
And it was the postal votes that kind of won it back for the Green candidate, or the independent candidate.
And one really has to say, Mr. Hofer, far right, right-wing, populist. He was appearing during the election campaign as somebody who is young, far younger than the others, energetic, nice, modest. So somehow his whole presentation, and this has to be taken into consideration, was really not a far right-wing presentation of himself, but it was really the one, of course. But it was the one somehow trying to harvest sympathy at the majority of the population. And therefore it's important to say the majority of the population in Austria is not far right-wing. It's not. They are simply seeking for somebody who understands their concerns. And this was something he really did in a proper way.
Mr. HALLA-AHO, do you think it's as simple as that, down to a good PR campaign overall?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, the federal president of Austria does not have very wide executive powers. And in that sense, the outcome of the elections had largely a symbolic meaning. And I don't doubt it had a very large symbolic meaning for the Greens and for the left and for the pro-immigration camp. On the other hand, the win was extremely narrow, which means that either one of the candidates could have easily won the election. In my opinion, the most important message and signal of the outcome of the elections was the complete collapse of the traditional mainstream parties in the first round of the elections. And the result also shows that Austria, like almost all Western European countries, is becoming increasingly polarized by the question of immigration. As mentioned, almost 50% of Austrians were prepared this time to vote for a candidate of the FPÖ. And according to opinion polls, the party is already the largest party in Austria, and they have the parliamentary elections next year. So,
indeed, all eyes will be on those parliamentary elections. But let's look at the issue of immigration. That was one definitely this Freedom Party campaigned on. Austria did have an open-door policy at the start of this migrant crisis, as we're calling it here in the EU. They let some 90,000 people in, then they changed the rules, put limits on that. Ms. GRASSLE, are you shocked with the results from Austria? Do you think that immigration campaign was a large element of it?
I think it was a part of the campaign, but for me the result shows that never change your line. The Austrian government changed its line during the refugee crisis, and it's a real crisis for us all. Nobody invited them, but we have a crisis around Europe, and this change of politics and of the policy means that it was false. And all parties who said from the beginning that this line was false, they got a lot of support by their own government. And this was the big error. That's why never change your line.
Mr. Urtasun, how do you see it when you look at the results from those presidential votes? Do you think it was maybe Austrians wanting to narrow themselves in and close those borders, or do you think it was simply against the traditional parties?
Well, first of all, I have to say that we are, as European Greens, very happy that we have the first Green head of state was elected. I think he ran a very, very good campaign. And I have to say also that he was very good confronting the extreme right with defending very fundamental values. And I want to make the link with what was mentioned before with refugees. The best way to tackle the extreme right is to defend very strongly your fundamental values. And I think that he was very good at that. It was a pro-European campaign. He was himself, being himself a son of a refugee with an open-minded policy regarding refugees. And I think that's the good way of approaching the extreme right. Because when you change your line, as it was mentioned, and you start doing a kind of a public speech that is more and more like the extreme right, what you do is you offer them votes. And that is exactly what should be done to tackle the extreme right.
At the same time, when you look at that migration question, Mr. HALLA-AHO, I know you'd also like Finland to have a very closed-door policy on that. Your party has gained in popularity since this migrant crisis began. You're now part of government. The foreign minister is from your party. How are Finns, how important is that to Finns? Do Finns want that closed-door policy?
You mean the Finns party or the Finns as a nation?
Yes, Finns party. Well, Finns as a nation as well. How do you see public opinion? I mean, your party is gaining in popularity.
Yes. Well, our party, in terms of its membership and candidates and MPs, is a very heterogenic traditional populist party. But I would say that for a large majority of our voters, this was one of the key issues in the elections. And they don't necessarily agree with everything we say about some other issues, especially issues related to taxation or economics. But I would say that most of our voters expect from our government a more tough approach towards immigration.
But very few migrants are crossing into Finland. And how would that work out? Is it acceptable that Finns would be allowed to travel out to other countries?
Per capita, Finland was the fourth largest recipient of asylum seekers last year in the European Union.
So we've looked at, we've seen Finland, it has had more refugees arrive, but that's just one element. Another thing you're wondering, is the vote in Austria an anti-EU vote? Because a lot of these national parties, that's what they point the finger of blame to Brussels for everything that goes wrong in their countries. Is that what
I would say no. It was really a vote, first of all, against the existing systems, the people against. It was really unfortunately, it was really a vote against the government as it was, because the people realized there is a standstill. There is really a deep wish, more or less, that decisions are taken and implemented. And this is more or less a wake-up call, not only to talk about changes, but to do them.
And this message we've been getting really across the board in the EU. I mean, Portugal election, Irish elections, Spain's elections, no real winner coming out. The voting is being divided across the bloc. Mr. Hutchison, how do you see Spain addressing that?
Well, I think in Spain, the political party system has also collapsed, the traditional political party system. We had a purely, almost perfect bipartisan system that totally collapsed. Of course, this is new, and then, of course, for the formation of government, it creates a new dynamic, and the country needs to adapt to that. But I think that there is one extremely good element about the change of the party system in Spain, which is that we don't have any far-right party. And that is extremely positive. I think that there are two main reasons for that. The first one is that the crisis ended with a social movement of protest that was progressive, that wanted change, but from a progressive perspective. That was very important. And second thing, both in Portugal and in Spain, the far-right dictatorships ended very late. They went up until the 70s. And I think there's an historical memory of the populations not to back far-right parties. We have far-right parties for sure, but they are always defeated in elections. And I think those are two reasons why in Portugal and Spain we don't have far-right parties.
Well, Spain might be the exception on that issue, but as you're saying, far-right national parties, they have seen their support base increase across Europe. Mariam Sab reports.
Germany's Frauke Petry, Hungary's Viktor Orban, France's Marine Le Pen, or Austria's Norbert Hofer. Across Europe, far-right leaders are increasingly winning over voters' sympathies. France's Front National Party has existed for decades. Last year, Marine Le Pen dominated regional elections. She's now a contender to reach the second round of presidential elections next year. Frauke Petry's Alternative for Germany party, on the other hand, is only 3 years old, yet in March she too made significant gains in parliamentary elections. From the migrant crisis to terror attacks on European soil to domestic issues like unemployment, nationalist parties are using xenophobic rhetoric to appeal to voters and play on the feeling that mainstream parties are growing more and more impotent. Europe's handling of the Greek bailout also gave impetus to the rise of the far right, as Europeans stepped up calls for Athens to leave the European Union. There's also the well-oiled PR machine. Marine Le Pen has softened her image in a bid to distance herself from her hardline father. Earlier this year, she launched a blog called Notebooks of Hope, where, among other things, she poses with kittens. She also expelled her father from the party over anti-Semitic comments he made. In Austria, Norbert Hofer is seen as a friendly face of the party, using his charm, charisma and youth to seduce the country's voters.
We heard there in that report, the Alternative for Deutschland. It's a new party, but it's yet gaining popularity. We saw those elections, local elections, 3 different areas. It took between 14 and 24% of the vote. Ms. GRASSLE, what is your ruling party, the CDU, doing wrong, and what are you going to do about it?
It is a protesters party, but it's also a party who profits from a certain unclear line within the CDU and the CSU. This is our sister party in Bavaria has another line much more close to AfD. And in our view, in my view, they help AfD to get this to make these arguments really choosable by a broader public. That's why we need to agree on the line on refugees. This is of utmost importance.
And a lot of, in the past, a lot of these more extreme or very right-wing parties were seen as being able to tout a certain line because they were in the opposition, they weren't in power. Increasingly, we're seeing them in government. We're seeing, are we not, a very less hardline position from these parties?
I mean, we already had our experience in Austria. We already had FPÖ in the government, and we're still suffering. We're really paying as taxpayers because Jörg Haider, when his party was in the government, more or less did decisions that are a catastrophe. Carinthia, the province of Carinthia, is bankrupt because of corruption, because of deals with Hypo Alpe Adria, and we're paying as taxpayers right now billions and billions every year.
So you think voters just want somebody new, or because they don't believe in the corruption?
They want a lot. I mean, what they want is jobs, affordable housing, and good education. And we are doing a mistake when we're always surfing on this vague of fear of refugees, of fear of something we don't know. We should focus on our real topics.
Mr. Urtasun?
I agree on that. I think there's in general a collapse of the party system everywhere. They are not stable anymore. And of course, because we have a big social crisis in the whole EU. The thing is that we need to lead a political battle in order that this change in the party political system doesn't lead to this to the destruction of democracy, which would mean that those parties have a majority. And there's one important point that needs to be mentioned. Those far-right parties haven't been governing in Europe for now, but they vote here in the European Parliament. They have members of Parliament and they vote. And we have their voting record. And for instance, the French Front National refuses to vote in favor of a report that asks tackling energetic poverty, for instance. They abstain when we create a commission to tackle fiscal fraud. So we know what they do. So at the end, they are sometimes when they are asked how they knew, are they really fighting as they claim against the establishment? That is not right if you see the voting record here.
Mr. HALLA-AHO, I mean, your party is one of these new parties, something new to offer the public. How do you see, what's the thing appealing to voters most? How are you so different?
Well, I think we should worry less about the so-called extreme right parties and perhaps talk more about the reasons why people vote for these parties. I think your explanation is too simple. People are not just, they don't want just to express a protest against the traditional party system. A growing number of people are very worried about the social and economic price tag that comes with the massive immigration and the complete failure of the European societies to integrate those people. People have bad experiences, and it's logical to assume that as the numbers grow, the situation will grow even worse.
Mr. Urtasun, I can see you shaking your head.
No, because of course one cannot say, and this is exactly what the far-right parties say, that the problems of unemployment and the social crisis are due to the refugees. This is totally demagogic.
Germany, that some rich people voted in favor of Alternative for Deutschland. The voters for them are more rich than other people in the
Yes.
average.
Well, indeed, and when
The
you
very
look
rich
at
one
Austria-
vote for the extreme right, but the very poor as well, because they are afraid that on social security issues that there might be a concurrence. I think that this is what parties need to tackle, to take away the fear and immigration. The refugees does not mean immigration. It is a humanitarian act for Syrian refugees for the war, and the idea is that of course the Syrians go back, but nobody tells about that. What is
But
really
let's stick
behind this
even to
refugee
the economic side, because
issue.
it does look, I mean, Austria is one of the best economies in the EU, and employment is only at 5%. And yet you had this massive upswing for
Yes,
the party.
because it's not only about an answer, try and answer on the economic situation. It's about
people want to protect
subjective
what they have.
feelings. Exactly. It has to do with the fears of the future. So people who are really having a job, having a nice house, living in the countryside where they have never seen a refugee before, they are voting for the far right because they are afraid, and we have to,
So are
to work
Europeans
against
getting
this
more and more
threat.
afraid? Are we a cowardly bunch here in Europe?
No, I think, of course, there's a social crisis. I think the austerity measures, and in a way, have broken the European social contract in the last years. I think this is fair to recognize. And of course, when this big social crisis happens, then you have all these demagogical parties that try to grow, creating fear. When what we have to tackle is a big problem of inequality, not a problem related to migration or related to refugees. I'm sorry.
Thanks indeed to my guests for having joined us. Thanks also to you at home for having tuned in. Join us after the news. We'll be speaking with Ukraine's foreign minister, Pavlo Klimkin. See you then.